Hello everybody and welcome to the latest edition of Hess World. I'm actually delighted today that my guest is Charley Woodward and I'll be in conversation with Charley over the next hour. Charley is somebody I worked with for many years. I've known Charley for over 30 years. Charley is also somebody who went through transitioning to being a trans woman. I knew Charley prior to that, and I've known Charley since that, and it's a really interesting life journey that Charley's been on, and we're going to cover the industry, a role in sales, and also that personal journey that she's been on. So welcome today, Charley.
Thank you, Martin.
A little bit of recap about your career. We met when we were at a company called Sequence, which was bought by IBM, and it's a real good plug for Sequence because we all loved it there. It was a great company, wasn't it?
Amazing.
And I remember the first time I met you, we were at the Wall of Windows in Weybridge.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
And for those that don't know what the hell the Wall of Windows was, it was a Sequence way of showing that they could scale an Oracle relational database better than anybody else. God, I mean, remember those days. Charley was a top performer. You worked in a lot of large, successful companies. I think you were at Digital, weren't you, before you...
Yeah, Digital, Oracle, obviously Sequent, as you mentioned, but also finished my career 17 years at VMware.
17 years at VMware. And some smaller startups as well?
Yes, I did 3 startups, which I've got magical memories of those as well. But luckily, one of them I was actually heading up their EMEA business that got acquired by VMware. I remember coming into VMware and thinking, oh, I like this. This looks interesting. I'll have some of this. No idea how 17 years passed by, but 17 magical years.
I can't believe you were 17 years. If you would have said to me, how long did I spend at VMware, I would have said, 7, 8 years.
It was crazy, yeah. But as I said, VMware had a great way of just reinventing itself, bringing value for customers, all the things that we learned during our time at Sequent, and they genuinely cared about the customer. So I remember traveling, actually, somebody asked me, what made you stay there as long as you did? And I remember thinking about it, and I've never been one to impulse a reply about that question. I came back the next morning and asked the person, do you remember the question you asked me? And I did that because I was interested to see if they even cared about my answer. And they said, yes, they recited the question. And I said, I've been thinking about the question. And actually, the reason I stayed at VMware as long as I did was because I felt like I was part of something. And when you feel like you're part of something, you feel like you're contributing to something, you bring your full self to work. And that makes a difference.
Were you at VMware before the EMC?
No, I came into VMware in 2006. The EMC acquisition was just back end of 2004, so it was very recent after that. But I was part of the IPO that EMC did, so thankfully, which was very pleasant.
I remember back then you were a very clear-sighted, highly energetic, highly successful seller, very much driven by the comp plan, if I remember. In fact, somebody referred to you as the comp plan lawyer. And when the comp plan came out, like all good sellers, you basically went away, looked at it, and worked out where to make the money, didn't you? Which is what a comp plan's all about. If I go back to my IBM days, that was the big event of the year. The first week of January, the comp plan would come out and everyone would take it home and work out where to make the money. And then I was always amazed that a lot of sellers wouldn't do that. So you were up there with probably with one or two others as the most comp plan driven seller I know. Is that a fair comment?
I did wonder if that question would come up, or the statement of the comp plan lawyer. It just made me chuckle to think back 30 years later, think about that. To me, it was always kind of, when the comp plan as a salesperson is the steering wheel to your vehicle. So if the company writes a comp plan and it makes you, go left, and the company wants you to go right, you've done nothing wrong. The company's written the comp plan incorrectly.
Yeah.
But ultimately, The correct comp plan is when it's actually telling you to go in the direction that the company wants you to go in. So it always bemused me when I came across salespeople that didn't read the comp plan. To me, it's like, so what are you doing in sales? This is your document to tell you what the company wants you to do. So if you don't read it, you need to be going to do it in a different profession.
I totally agree.
And I have to say, going into leadership, the last number of years of my career, I took that with me. It's kind of like I'm not, the questions I'd ask salespeople would be related to what gets you out of bed in the morning, what's the thing that motivates you? And it's not always money. It can be a multitude of different things. But ultimately in a sales role, it's got to be a component of it that's driving you to that.
Yeah, totally agree.
And that would set the tone. You talked about Sequent. Sequent was all about that. And that's why it was the magic of the company. It cared about customers. It cared about delivering value, but it also cared about making salespeople align with the strategy of that company. And that's what it
I'll talk about Sequent in a minute.
So many great people all in one magical place at one time.
Didn't it frustrate you, though, Charlie, when the comp plan, and maybe you've never experienced this, but when the comp plan doesn't align with what the CEO and senior execs say the strategy is? So, for example, they tell the street, new logo's really important, or XYZ's really important, but it doesn't reflect itself in the comp plan. There's no, for example, there's no real incentive. So they haven't organised around new logo. There's no significant incentive around new logo, but you're telling the world how important it is at the top of the company. That was a source of enormous frustration for me over the years. That misalignment between company strategy and comp plan.
Yeah, I think the word that would actually capture would be bemused by it. Be kind of like, you think the incompetence of a company that actually assumes salespeople get out of bed and do all the right things without you giving them the document to articulate why they're doing the right things. Because when you've got the comp plan right and the salesperson is doing things wrong, it means in your one-to-ones you've got something to talk about. You've got a structure.
But you actually, just thinking back, you came to Sequent, which is an incredibly sales-driven culture.
Very.
But you came from digital deck, where they didn't pay commissions. So that was, and I never really got that.
No, that's not actually factually true. So the deck I joined had rolled out comp plans. So the Ken Olsen days where it was, salespeople do the right thing, they don't need a comp plan. That wasn't the era I was in. But the company I joined was a disjointed digital that was desperately trying to get salespeople to join it, but had a misaligned comp plan. So coming into Sequent at the time was like a breath of fresh air to me. But actually, it was also a time when I reflect back and I think of the characters, all the people you and I would think back on. I was just, it's almost like...
How old were you when you arrived at Sequent?
30. And I remember feeling like, almost like, when you move into a Premiership football team and you're in awe of all these gods around you. It must be like, how do I fit into this? And there was times when I'd actually question myself, like, these people are exceptional. And I still got pictures of their faces in my mind of that era.
Yeah.
That it was a magical time. But likewise, it made you step up your game. It made you you don't want to be a disappointment to the people around you. You want to be able to pass the ball like others. You want to make sure you're creating goals. You want to be back in defence to make it. The whole thing needed to flow. And if I think of, using the football analogy, if I think of the best teams in the era of my life, they played as a team. You go back to the Brian Clough era of the Nottingham Forest of our day.
I thought you were, as a Villa supporter, I thought you'd mention that great Villa team.
Yeah. Well, the Ron Saunders era of winning the First Division, and then the Tony Barton inheriting and winning the European Cup. Of course, I think of that. But there is the individuals that made up the team, that made the team exceptional, and that was Sequent. They knew how to make
team culture, but completely. I also thought it was also. They very deliberately went out, and I remember Alistair Budd, the HR director, saying, we deliberately go out and hire and pay top quartile packages. That's the way it is. We want...
Yep.
And I remember when I was in board reviews at the UK level, one of the things we used to measure was how many sellers there were. This was going back into the late 90s.
Yeah.
How many sellers were earning over $250,000 a year?
Yeah.
And when it started dropping, we were worried. Because
we wanted
lots of very wealthy sellers in the company because it was a reflection on how well the company was doing. And, that to me, it was a really winning culture. I would say it was very positive impressionable few years for me as well.
Well, if I remember even back to my original interview and the whole process of the interview, to me, there's certain things that are ornate as a salesperson. To me, I'd like to think I treat everybody with respect, whether it's the girl or man on reception, whether it's the postman or postwoman, whether it's the CEO, treat everybody with respect and treat everybody equal. I'm not starstruck by the different levels that people are in. But if I think back to the days of Sequin, say coming in for interview and the girls on reception and the way you treat them, then you go for the 5 different people you meet through the whole process. And by the time you get to the next process, that person's already phoned it through. You don't even know this.
Yeah.
You don't even know this. But, to me as a salesperson, when you're meeting with a customer, I'd absolutely ask the people on reception what they thought of that person. I'd absolutely ask every single stage of that. Because if you're building a team, you don't want any arrogance in there. You don't want any disconnection. But I didn't even realise that time. It was just ornate in you.
I agree with you. I know we're spending a lot of time talking about Sequin today, but it's because it was a very special culture, wasn't it? And
it's the only company I ever saw that, witnessed that.
Yeah, and you see, I think it combined, a very strong sales-driven culture, and quite often when you get a strong sales-driven culture, there's some bad things that go with it, like a revolving door policy, firing people after missing a quarter's numbers, or a real sort of hard edge blame culture. Had none of those things. To me, it combined a fantastic sales culture, but a high values culture.
Yeah, agreed.
And if you think about, I think we went down to Goodwood House, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
Because we joined roughly at the same time. And you spent all new joiners, didn't they? They went to Goodwood House in Sussex. The morning was on the values of the company.
Yep.
And in the afternoon, probably some ex-Royal Marines got us to do some outbound team building stuff. And then in the evening, we used to have a crazy party.
Yep.
And that summed up Sequin, didn't it?
Yes.
Values, teamwork, have a lot of fun at the same time. And I do think that they managed to get that combination absolutely right.
And I think for a number of years after it, I kind of pined for that, but I came to a realisation that actually you can create that.
Well, Oracle wouldn't have been like that,
No, Oracle was the place where actually I learned that I always thought I was money motivated, but actually in Oracle I probably earned the most amount of money, but I was the least happy. Because actually you go on holiday and kind of somebody else is in your suitcase. It's kind of that's not a culture I want to be within. I want to be in a place of people I respect, people I rate, but people I trust. Trust in me and my vocabulary is a big word. It's the root and foundation stone of me as a person. So, but that sounds like I'm dissing.
And what did you learn at VMware then? Because that must have still had a bit of a startup feel to it when you joined.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Actually, for a very long period of my time in VMware managed to keep that startup culture for a very long period of time. Even in the Joe Tushy era of the EMC acquiring them, Joe was smart enough to recognise actually keep it separate, don't integrate it. And it allowed the company to grow the ecosystem, because the magic of VMware wasn't about just selling VMware. It was the ecosystem was king. Just as important to EMC would have been NetApp. Just as important to VMware would be Oracle, just as important to... Now, it's not that these... I've always said, we live in an industry of tarts. There's people we'll sleep with, and the next thing, the people we're actually partnering with. That's the
co-opetition, I think.
Yes,
was
yes. I'm probably being a little bit rude in my word.
We all know what you mean.
But VMware had this way of realizing, or making it that HP are just as important as IBM, was just as important in the day of the compact days. Obviously, no longer there. Each of the coexisting vendors are just as important as each other, and it's a horses for courses. As long as the answer is VMware.
Yeah,
as long as VMware the centre of it.
VMware, I guess, being the first to this world of virtualizing your infrastructure, they got strong market power quite quickly, didn't they?
Well, it's interesting, actually. The first company to actually virtualize was IBM many years earlier.
Exactly. I used to say with a product called VM, by the way.
Yeah. But what VMware did was bring it onto the x86 platform and actually commoditize. I mean, our industry is constantly commoditized. Actually, staying at the top echelon end of our business is where the money sits.
Yeah.
And VMware was remarkable in terms of how it constantly moved forward and stayed at value to customers. And that's what made me stay there. You know, for me, I enjoy when I can, you know, when the rubber hits the road and I can see what value customers see from technology. I care little on the technology. I care on the value. And I love to see that. And I love to see when a CEO or a CFO, actually the business case does stack up and they do see the value. I didn't like the drive-by selling mentality of certain companies where you find actually you pull a fast one, they buy into it, and you don't care on the implementation.
You and me both. That's never. Well, have I been involved in one of those?
We've all probably been involved in it, but actually, it's never fit with me.
Yeah, likewise.
And I've not stayed in those companies for long.
Yeah, likewise. And you joined at a time when that business was on fire, wasn't it? So
I mean, I came into VMware. As I said, I remember thinking this was the classic shooting fish in a barrel moment. This is a classic time when, you know, I remember 2008 when the credit crunch hit. You know, VMware had seen, you know, double-digit growth for many years, and all of a sudden, credit crunch hit, and the brakes went on the business, and it was quite a tough time for 2 quarters.
Yeah.
But then CFOs realised, actually, this does deliver value. This does save massive amounts of money. When you see Barclays reducing their footprint from 20,000 servers down to 2,000 servers, who wouldn't sign off on that? Who wouldn't?
Hardware boys hated you.
Yeah, of course they did. But until they realised that actually it gave a tech refresh to their hardware.
Exactly.
Once they realised that, why wouldn't you party with that?
Yeah. Now, you've left VMware now, haven't you? But
that's correct.
But while you were at VMware, you went through the transition.
Yeah.
By the way, apologies if I get the terminology wrong.
No, you Martin, honestly, you won't get the terminology. I mean, I'd actually...
So I think it was something like 20... Tell me.
2016. So 2016, I arrived at the decision to transition in the workplace. And it was an interesting time, actually, because I remember there was a lot of talk within the company about, the original one was women in the workplace. I remember that kind of like, and I remember sitting with a HR person and they're saying, what's all this women in the workplace thing? And they were talking about bringing a better balance in the workplace. And I kind of got into that.
Because it was a very male-centric
incredibly male-centric.
Industry, probably in the sales area.
Probably too male-centric, if I'm honest. But I'm a huge believer of it isn't about getting balance of men and women right or more, diversity in the workplace. It's about getting the best talent for the job, ultimately. It has to be about that. It can't be about...
Can we come back to that, actually, after your journey? Because I think that's a really important point.
But I do remember sitting with this HR person. I was in Dublin at the time at a business dinner. And I said, so what's all this women in the workplace? They explained it. And they said, actually, we've gone the next step further. We talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace and bringing more minority groups into the... And this is before I transitioned. And they said, give you an example, we've only got one trans woman in the company. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I know of 2. Obviously, at this point, nobody knows. But it made me realise it is possible to transition the workplace. But it got the mind thinking in terms of where I was myself. But I hadn't made the decision at that point. But if I go back in time, what are the big things that gets you to a place? But by the way, if I caveat whatever I'm going to say, I'm a survey of one. This is my version. It's not everybody's version. It's my version. What do I say here? But in terms of, this isn't about Charley Woodward, the trans woman. This is about Charley Woodward, the human being that believes they want to have the happiest version of themselves. They want to bring the most authentic version of themselves into whatever they do. And I realised back in 2015, 14, 13, in the run-up to this, I'd already, and I used to say, Charlie's got, I'm wearing 2 hats. I mean, the early days of Charlie the cross-dresser, where Charlie at the weekend would go off and dress up as Charlie, to start with.
When did you start doing that, Charlie? And tell me to butt out if I ask some questions that are too intrusive.
I mean, if I go back in time, if I go back to childhood,
let's go right back there.
But both you and I came from a pre-internet world. And to some of the younger people, they all think the internet was always there.
Pre-mobile phone world.
Yeah, pre-mobile phone, pre-internet world. So I remember as a 7-year-old going in my parents' bedroom and trying on my mum's clothes. And at the time, I just thought I was a bit weird.
Yeah.
I just thought, well, that's not what people do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't have the benefit of the internet. I didn't have a way of connecting to that. I remember going through teenage years and seeing when puberty hits, looking around thinking, well, I wish that was me. That's peculiar to some people. It's like, well, I didn't think about that. That was me.
Could you work out back as a teenager what was going on with you? Did you understand it?
No, not at all. But I know that I got to a period of my life where, maybe we talk about the 80s here, where you did have that gender bending era of people, certain people wearing different clothes and different makeup and things like that. So it's kind of there, but not mainstream. It was there in the background.
What, David Bowie and...
Yeah. I mean, that's going back even further before my time. Yeah, the 70s.
He was a real trailblazer.
Yeah, the 70s. But actually, I then talk about kind of the middle years of my life where you go down the path of being more traditional, having family, in relationships, paying for children in school.
You were married with children?
Yeah, I've been married twice. I've got four children that I'm very grateful for. And I have a fabulous relationship with all four of them. I love them dearly. I feel very grateful for that. But I remember, going through your life isn't about just having highs. That's not real world life.
Yeah.
Life is about highs and lows. For me, you asked the question of kind of what were the things. So I remember in kind of 2008. So 2008, I lost two friends. One died of cancer. So in a 7-month period, went from the fittest person I know to looking like a 97-year-old man. Yeah. And unfortunately passed away. Then somebody else, 3 months later, a friend of mine, unfortunately passed away and we got run over in the Marylebone Road. And when these things hit you, to me, the only positive about death is it should shake the people still here to live your life.
Yeah.
Be honest and true to yourself. So this isn't a story about Charley the trans woman. This is about Charley the human being that actually is bringing the best, most authentic, happiest version of themselves. So by the time you face those, I call it birth by 1,000 cuts. There's no one thing I can attribute and say, this is the thing that got me to that place. The big word that people often use is, I really admire your bravery. And I remember at the time thinking...
Well, I said that to you, didn't I?
You have. It was one of the, and it was almost, when the news came out, that was the number one thing that people would say to me. And so much so, I remember, I even read in the Oxford Dictionary, what does this word mean? In case I get it. When all you see is the tip of the iceberg, you don't actually see the 10 times bigger iceberg underneath of the things that got you to that decision. So by the time you make that decision, that thing that actually you think is jumping the Grand Canyon, the truth is it's walking over a piece of cotton.
Yeah.
It's nothing. This is the best version of yourself. So actually, but I get why people would use that word.
If I go back to Sequent again, because that's our reference point for you and I, that was such an alpha male environment. I mean, how did you feel in that environment? Or did you... Were you incredibly adaptable? Is that the...
Yes. Yeah, at the end of the day, you do adapt, and that's life. This isn't about just putting yourself on everybody. We do live in a slightly different world, or in fact, not slightly, very different world where you're able to do that.
And you couldn't have
probably not
announced.
Probably not.
It would have been very difficult
Probably
in the 1990s in our industry, I would suggest. And for that, we should be very proud of how that industry and society's evolved, shouldn't we?
Yes, absolutely.
So, I remember, 2016 was it?
2016, yes.
And did you tell your family before... And how did all that go?
That's a great question. So the sequence of events was this: I remember sitting down with my boss. That was an interesting conversation. It was about a year earlier, and they were talking about kind of they'd just done a 10K. They had a really impactful weekend. They did a 10K, and actually I'd told an old school friend for the first time about Charley. So kind of on scales of weekend, I'd probably had a bigger one in terms of making an announcement about myself. So I was already on a journey. So I remember sitting down with my boss and saying, by the way, this was me at the weekend. I went to somebody's 50th birthday party, trans party. And they kind of said to what are you saying? And they kind of, well, I'd like to transition in the workplace. So they arranged a meeting with HR. I remember sitting with HR, and HR said, okay, you want to transition? What do you want to say? I remember at the time thinking, well, I don't know, really. I hadn't even thought about it. They said, well, this is your announcement. So I went home that night, and I remember I didn't sleep a lot that night. I remember waking up and writing all these notes about, and I think you were one of the short list of people I communicated with, emailed to say, by the way, this is Charley, and I captured my story. I then had
very moving. It was too as well, and I felt when I received that, this is somebody who's probably been suffering a bit, and actually this was liberating. Was how I. But anyway, let's not go. Sorry, apologies for interrupting.
No, you don't need to apologise. But I remember at the time thinking, I've written this kind of write-up of my announcement. But then I realised actually there's people in the workplace that deserve more than just an email blast to say, by the way, it's now Charley.
Yeah.
There were people that either I'd worked with for a long time, so people like yourself. There were people that I sit near, or people I still work with on a regular basis that I felt like they deserve more than that. They need the one-on-one version, not the... And at the time, I didn't realise it, but actually, it was one of the most incredible times, actually sitting with people and sharing the story. So I remember there were 22 meetings I had with people in VMware, of combination of people I either sat with, people I work with, or people I used to work with. And what I got was 22 stories back. Not about trans, but their own version of their own. Everybody's got a story to tell. And that's what you realise. We've all got our own stories, whether we decide to tell it. It's not about being trans, it's about anything. So there's a period where it was incredibly liberating to me. And it actually almost became a period where it became the agony aunt, where people would come to you, I really admire your bravery. And by the way, this is me.
And had you told your family by then?
So that would come back to that piece. It was the kind of what I realised was actually... parts of my family I had, but not all of them. And actually what I realised was actually the most important part of my life is my family. It was a time when I thought I was wearing two hats. I was wearing a hat for work and a hat for Charley in my personal life. But the reality is I was wearing probably 27 hats for different eras of my life, periods of my life where, you bump into somebody and they see you got longer hair or you got somebody, you're almost apologising for yourself. So I did. I sat down with my family and it's the one piece where I bring it back to when people say if there's one piece of advice you could give people, what would it be? And the one piece I'd say is, if you've had a lifetime coming to this decision, why is it reasonable or realistic to expect people to get it instantly? I've got 4 children and all 4 arrived at acceptance at a different pace. But what I wasn't going to do is shove Charley down their throats. So these are the most important people in my life. And actually, what's lovely now, fast forward all these years later, I've got a great relationship and really feel really lucky, really blessed. That's the
very special. And human, don't you think most people are very, maybe in this country, we're tolerant, we're understanding, we tend to be kind,
Yeah.
I'd like to think that.
It's funny, you and I talked about your trip to Auschwitz before we came in here, and actually... I caveat it to this is to echo what you've just said, Martin, is most people are really nice. Most people are really kind as their core. In World War II, when you talk about the concentration camps and things like that, yes, there are some cruel bastards, but they're a minority.
Yeah.
They're not the majority. And actually, most people just want you to be happy. Most people are too busy on their own lives anyway. So actually, bring it back to the post-war years we were lucky enough to be in. Yes, I'm sure there's some cruel bastards out there, but they're not the majority. They're the minority, and I've come across none of them. Or if I have, they've not outed themselves. But why would they?
I think that's it's lovely to hear that your family rallied round. I guess one of the things that might have helped you is I think you're always been a very confident person. I think you have. I think you've been comfortable in your own skin. I've always remembered, and I think you've never been a social climber. I think you've always been. I think you've always had your feet on the ground. And you've always been very interested in other people. I always remember meeting up with you, and you always asked me bloody questions that I thought, crikey, he's really.
And sometimes those questions I get it wrong because I recognise it can overstep.
It's great selling quality,
but it's
by
a
the way.
genuine interest. It's a genuine interest. If somebody says something to me and they've chosen to say it, then expect to be asked a question if I don't understand it.
But that's great. But sorry, going back to your professional career, and I know you went into leadership positions, but at heart, you and I are sellers, aren't we? And to me, one of the great qualities of sellers is being inquisitive.
Completely.
And asking questions in a way that doesn't offend people, but you want to be a bit nosy, don't you, about them, about their customers, about the companies, about everything that's going on.
Well, I guess it brings it back to the art of selling isn't about telling the customer everything you know. Yeah, the art of selling is asking the questions that relate back to what it is you've got to offer. So I use the analogy of selling a car. If your car's white and the customer's looking for a black car, if they don't ask the question what colour the car is, and they, as part of your pitch, you're saying it's full service history, it's got no dents in it, it's, low mileage, you haven't lied to the customer. I absolutely don't believe in lying to customers. I think that's absolutely the wrong approach to do. And you do come across some salespeople that do that. But if the customer then comes and said, but it's not white, we haven't lied to them, but come and have a look. The leather seats are in perfect condition. The mileage is really nice, low. The condition of the bodywork is really good. You're playing it to what it is you've got to offer. And it's no different in terms of this, in terms of actually just being honest and being authentic and being consistent to what your values are.
Do you think those values have helped you transition and be comfortable in being Charley?
100%. I mean, if I bring it back to, I see it a lot in the trans world, is people get so hung up about pronouns, about the he, she, they, and the reality is the approach I took when I decided to transition was, I know my preferred pronouns, she and her. Yeah, those are my preferred ones. But if somebody's known me for 30 years, they're probably going to get my pronouns wrong a little bit for a while. So if I choose to go, it's she, the only thing you're going to do is alienate yourself from those people. Why would you want to do that? Why do you want to make other people feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Actually, what I found by saying nothing, people come back and say, I'm so sorry. What are you sorry for? Because I got the pronoun wrong.
Did you feel different in your day-to-day work after you announced 2016? Did you sort of show up at work feeling different? And although people were kind to you, did that whole dynamic of the workplace change?
It was an interesting time. I mean, there's people that have known me for a long time. I knew some guys where, and I won't name them, it wouldn't be fair, but I remember we were away on a business trip and they offered to carry my suitcase for me. I remember at the time thinking, oh, you can if you want. You're kind of like, they wouldn't normally have done that. So they were, but they were just being kind, and it was nice. You kind of like, I was fine.
Did you like that?
It'd be wrong to say I like that. I certainly wasn't fishing for that, but there was a compliment in there.
Yeah, well, it meant they took who you were very seriously.
But there were other people. I remember a funny story actually. I remember you had a sales centre up in Liverpool, so I doing a Panamera role at the time, and I was always one for walking the floor. Yeah. Exactly why, there's much about your sales leadership that I echoed and amplified into my sales leadership. It's something I am. I don't want to sit in the gods in a shut room, just having smoke blown at my bum. I want to hear what's happening on the street. So I'd always walk the floor. And my first day in the Liverpool office, I walked in, sales management came over and gave me a hug and really pleased, blah, blah, very nice. I remember a sales guy walking in that normally would come over to me and come and say hello. And they walked around me. I remember standing there thinking, how do I break the ice? I can't live in a world where people are scared of me. And I remember leaning forward and saying, you do know Charlie likes to talk about football, don't you? And they suddenly beamed with a smile. I said, so how did you feel when you heard the news about Charlie? And they said, sad. I said, sad? Why? Everybody loved, they used my old name. I said, yeah, but the reality is that person hasn't died. I'm still alive. I just have a bigger smile on my face now. I said, you remember when I used to ask you about the different bars and clubs in Liverpool that you'd go into? The reason I was asking you was because at night time, Charlie's going out. And that you kind of broke the ice to that situation. But to hear this, they said, but the whole floor loved. And it's kind of
I guess I think you just touched on it. In many respects, it's harder for the people that knew you in pre-Charley days. And I think it might, just sort of leading on from that into the workplace. I think the workplace is quite a scary place these days.
Well, I remember a funny story, actually. I remember seeing the announcement of Charley. I did a video conference call with, there's about 80 on the call of people that worked within the team. And at the end of it, there's a lady that I suddenly leant forward and she said, do you mind if I ask a question? They said, yes. So I'd done my summary about Charley, introduction, blah, blah. And this person leant forward and said, does Charley sound any different? And I remember replying to say, she can if you'd like her to. And the whole floor burst out laughing.
Well, that's because people, and if you think about the workplace, and there are lots of very good things about building a diverse culture, but there's also a bit of a terror around it as well, in that people don't know whether to say the right thing or call somebody the right name.
Which is a real shame.
But it's true, though, isn't it?
It's a real shame. It's a real shame.
Yeah, what's your view on that? Because at the end of the day, I think people do make mistakes. And for people, particularly of, say, my generation, the old farts, and maybe a bit younger, we're living in a much more tolerant society, and we're so much the better for that. But you occasionally make mistakes, or
completely,
well,
the world seems to have lost a sense of humour. Yeah. We live in this. I mean, people use this word woke constantly. We're human. We make mistakes. It's okay. For me, it's about the ability to apologise if you've said something that offended you didn't intend to offend.
Yeah.
But likewise, the ability to accept an apology, is absolutely, it's a strength. That's how we should be. And actually, we live particularly in the corporate world, where we seem to have forgotten the basic rules. The basic rules are the person with the best experience, with the best qualifications, that actually is best for the job, gets the job, irrelevant what box of diversity they tick.
Yeah.
This is about delivering performance.
So you're basically, this might surprise sort of listeners and viewers who, so you're pretty much saying that, well, you are saying we should live in a meritocracy, best person for the job.
100%. Well, the moment we move away,
I passionately believe
we move away from that, businesses stop performing.
Well, I passionately agree with you, because that's how.
I mean, I do recognise that you. I do buy into the diverse cultures bring a level of creativity and a different angle and perspective on things. I do buy into that, but not at the cost of the top talent getting the job.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
I think it's a tough time to be a middle-aged white man in the world we live in, and it shouldn't be if they're the top talent. But I get that we kind of.
But it's tough. Look, I'd say the two great social achievements of my lifetime has been the role of women. I think it's wonderful.
Me too.
Obviously,
Agreed. Agreed.
Equality before the law, irrespective of sexual persuasion or what have you. And I think I'm proud of both of those things. But at the end of the day, that mustn't come at the expense of a meritocracy. I remember being at HP and in the UK board, and how do we basically get more women into top positions in the company? And the answer was, get more women coming into the industry in the first place. And how do you direct it? How do you affect it at the bottom end? How do you attract more people into the right courses and from uni? Otherwise, I think you're artificially fixing a problem. And one of the things I hate, I don't know what your view is, Charley, hate tokenism, hate doing it for the sake of.
Me too. I won't do anything for the sake of doing it. It needs to make sense to me. It needs to make sense to me about why we're doing something.
Yeah. You see, I see you as a fantastic, intuitive, driven seller who was a great sales leader as well. Doesn't matter that you've transitioned at all. It's irrelevant. You were very good at it before, and you're very good at it now, I'm sure.
Well, I remember the story when my brother said when it was before I obviously transitioned, when he first met Charley, so this is quite a long time ago. And these are his words. He said, I knew where you were. He said, I got to the building. He said, and actually when I got to the building, before I came in, I walked around the building 3 times. He said, because I was really nervous to meet you. This is my brother. He said, when I walked in, he said, I saw you. He said, yep, I was a little bit shocked. He said, a little bit later, he said, actually, you look pretty good. He said, but right at the end, and this is the piece that captures it perfectly for me, he said, you know what? This is not the most interesting thing about you. And that's my hope is, when I'm pushing the daisies up and it's on my gravestone, it says Charley the trans woman, I failed miserably. I'm hoping it was Charley, the great parent, Charley the loving person, Charley the compassionate person, Charley that had a level of humility to them, something with a little more depth and meaning to it than actually Charley the trans woman. We live in this world where you have to be put into a box of something.
Yeah. Well, I
don't buy
we met just before this today, didn't we? The first time we met for 6 years?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
You're the same person with the same worldview.
And that's the same as what my brother said.
We had the same discussions about the same issues. You got the same political views. You got the same worldviews, same views about people and values. It was,
It was a similar.
That was the
There's
same.
a similar story for my daughter. My daughter captured it lovely as well, and she said, "These were her words. This is I've got 4 children. My middle daughter, and she said, it's not that I didn't struggle." She said, when you first told me, she said, I did. She said, but what I did, I read a lot on it. She said, I spoke to a lot of friends. And she said, but what I realised is actually, the veneer may be different, but the person's just the same. Yeah. She said, but what I see is the happier version of the person. She said, and that's all I care about. And that's ultimately what you'd want your children. No different, you're a parent as well. Oh, Martin, is ultimately I want my children to be happy.
Right, that's it.
Healthy and happy. There's no complexity.
All I want in life is happiness.
It's not about
children.
what they achieve financially. It's about are they happy?
Totally.
Completely that.
I don't want to get into political discussions, but I have a view which is the militancy in the trans world actually works against.
I'd agree.
Acceptance.
I've got some thoughts on that. And I will share that.
And I hope I'm not basically. I'm not sure what your reaction would be to this, but
ask me any
see,
question.
I don't think trans women who've been through puberty should compete in women's sports. I feel quite strongly about that, and that's not being anti-trans. I just think it's being fair to women. Discuss. Do you think I'm?
No, it's a funny one, and this is where I have to be careful because obviously I don't want to agitate. There are people I capture as, I think I call them the trans Nazis. Yeah. They're kind of these extreme trans that actually you draw a massive map of the world. Yeah, and there's a microdot and they'll say, look, there's transphobia there. Look at it. Look, they're looking for the argument. Yeah. They're not looking at the bigger picture of the situation. Actually, and they make the statement of, trans rights are human rights. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? What does it mean? So when you bring it back to sport, to me, the word in sport, it's got to be fair.
It's got to be fair, exactly.
And I make one remark which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, with a little bit of humour in it, and one remark which is a little bit more fact-based. My tongue-in-cheek remark is, when you've got midgets and dwarfs, you don't hear them complaining they're not in the basketball team. Yeah. A basketball team, by its very nature, tends to be tall people. Yeah. So it's found its level naturally. I know that's a little bit, adding a bit of humour to it, so I don't mean to offend people with that. Likewise, you don't hear about, when you come to boxing, you don't hear skinny men complain they're not fighting the heavyweight champion of the world. It's found its level. It's found its fairness in the sport. And I believe when you bring it back to trans in sport, I still believe there's a level of science that needs to be added into this. It's not as simple as saying your hormone levels of testosterone and estrogen are the same as a woman, so it means you can compete in sport. There's a level of, when you've had a life of your body of testosterone, you'll have more strength. Yes. You'll have more muscle mass.
That's
you'll
a
have
biological
more height.
fact.
Yeah, so for me, I think it needs to come back to the world fair. That sport is fair, and I feel very blessed and very lucky that I live in a world that actually has accepted me to be a trans woman. People don't. They're not jumping down my throat, but I would live in a fear of a world that in 10 years' time you allow trans women into sport. In 10 years' time, trans women are dominating female sport. the backlash would be immense. And it's not a backlash I'd want to face.
So there's a fairness issue, but there's also a self-interest issue,
Yeah,
isn't
completely. And
Yeah.
if I bring it back to, it's interesting you only see this argument on trans women. You don't hear trans men that have, their starting point was female, that have transitioned to male. You don't hear that side of it because they don't have that advantage.
Correct.
Now, I accept this is just my opinion. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just my opinion, but that's where I sit with it.
No, thank you for that. That's so we're coming to the end of our discussion. Are you going to go back into the industry, into the IT industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm about to go off backpacking India. So I've got 5 weeks of going up to Mumbai and Delhi and Calcutta, and so I'm kind of living the dream of that at the moment. Undecided. Yeah, for me, it would need to be the right thing. I don't want a job just for a job. Yeah, that would make no sense to me at all. But if it was the right company, and the right ingredients and the right value proposition, never say never to anything. I think it's important to have an open mind to most things. I mean, something you asked me earlier in terms of on your journey, you talked about, do you think you've arrived at your journey? I talk about the quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Yeah, life is a journey, not a destination. Yeah, and actually, never say never to anything. I'm open-minded.
I'm a great believer in that quote as well. Life is a journey.
That's the joy of it.
Once you get to the destination, if it's all about the destination, you get there and that lasts a second.
Yeah.
It's the journey that lasts for a long time.
Well, somebody asked me recently, they said, are you really looking forward to India? And I was like, it's interesting, actually. Yes, I'm not looking forward to it, but I enjoy every day. Every day I get up in the morning and have a reason to get out of bed and a reason to go to bed at night. I'm happy in that. And actually,
you've been true to yourself, Charlie. That's the thing, isn't it? I think that's I think that's a lesson. Maybe you want to, we end on that, but I know it matters a lot to you that we're on this planet once. It doesn't last forever. You've got to be true to yourself. You've got to find your own happiness, as long as that isn't at other people's expense. And I think, have you found your happiness?
Yeah, it's kind of, it's interesting. I talked about the life is a journey, not a destination, and Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote. The second quote, this is probably less famous or familiar, is another quote that he made was, in a world that's constantly trying to make you somebody else, to be yourself is the greatest accomplishment. And actually, I'd say this is me. This is me. To answer your question, this is the happiest version of myself. And I have a nice circle of friends, a nice family. I've got lots of things to look forward to. I feel very lucky, very blessed.
I think that's a perfect note on which to end our conversation today.
Thank you,
Charlie. Thank you. Lovely seeing you again. Thank you for being so open, frank.
My pleasure. And thank you for inviting me.